Welcome to Caribbean Island News at 6. Today we will be focusing on our beautiful land as being a biodiversity hotspot and how the diversity of our species and our natural resources are quickly diminishing. Let's start with our location on the map. The Caribbean, long referred to as the West Indies, includes more than 700 islands. Of those, 13 are independent island countries on the map, and some are dependencies or overseas territories of other nations. The Caribbean islands are located in the Caribbean Sea, to the east of Central America, and to the north of South America. Biodiversity is decreasing in the Caribbean islands mainly in specific locations such as coral reefs. Caribbean coral reefs comprise only about 8% of the world's coral reefs. These reefs provide critical habitat to thousands of species, some of which are of very high commercial value. The Greater Caribbean became completely isolated from the Pacific when it developed its own unique coral reef biota. Unfortunately, the diversity of Caribbean coral reef life is considerably poorer than that of the Indo-Pacific region. Here, only about 65 species of hard corals are recognized, and perhaps 500 to 700 reef-associated fish species. Over the last 30 years, Caribbean coral reefs have suffered enormous declines both in terms of overall coral reef ecosystem health and the productivity of reef fisheries. Overdevelopment of coastal areas, overfishing, direct tourism impacts such as overuse of particular reefs for recreational diving and snorkeling, and declines in water quality have in many cases led to dire consequences for coral reefs, leaving devastated underwater seascapes where thriving hard coral colonies once stood. The second declination occurred in the sugarcane industry. However, it is only in the last 500 years that the significant environmental degradation has occurred. Sugarcane, which has led to widespread deforestation throughout the region, is still the Caribbean's most important crop. Another major impact of the arrival of human settlers has been the introduction of alien species, which is the biggest threat to biodiversity in this hotspot. Even before the arrival of Europeans, people in the Caribbean were transporting species that they used for food from one island to another. Early examples include the agouti, a land tortoise, and even the white-tailed deer. The small Asian mongoose, which was first introduced in 1872 to control rodents and poisonous snakes, has devastated native populations of reptiles and amphibians and led to the extinction of dozens of species. Rats, cats, dogs, goats, donkeys, monkeys, tilapia, and even trout also pose a serious threat to native fauna. Natural resources and ecosystems have been devastated on some islands. For example, no less than 92% of amphibian species found on Haiti are threatened with extinction. Of course, there are some factors impacting the biodiversity of our land, some being social, economical, and environmental factors. Firstly, social factors include the population. There are approximately 39 million people living in the Caribbean. These people have a great impact on the natural ecosystems and various organisms living within the area. After a poll was taken to determine whether the population would have to relocate to preserve the biodiversity of the region, the results were 89% for and 11% against. A quote from one of the anonymous voters said, "It would save the organisms and species because the ecosystems would receive less harm and there would be less factors affected." Now, moving on to economical factors. The Caribbean islands receive over 100,000 tourists per year. This number considerably affects our resources and our economy. Although tourism contributes less to the long-term economy than expected, tourism here requires larger capital because of the infrastructure that is necessary. This means Western-style amenities were needed to attract tourists. These amenities included airports, roads, sewage treatment plants, landfills, electricity, and telephones. Basically, tourism here has modernized the Caribbean's traditional living style, and taking away some authenticity and resources. Lastly, we have environmental factors. The most widespread environmental problem affecting almost all island countries is the safe disposal of liquid domestic wastes, particularly human waste and urban sewage. Few countries have adequate waste collection and treatment facilities even in the most developed urban areas, and those that exist are costly and barely ever properly maintained. In spite of efforts at rural sanitation, facilities in many rural areas of the Caribbean are still mostly or entirely lacking. The result is serious water pollution, both of fresh water supplies, meaning rivers, groundwater, and even rainwater, and coastal waters around beaches, reefs, and lagoons that are important for tourism, recreation, and fishing. This pollution presents grave risks to human health. As well, coral reefs are destroyed by construction, pollution, and dynamiting, which are poisonous for fish. Mangroves are killed off by dredging or filling, or by changing essential patterns of water circulation and salinity. The Caribbean government is thoroughly aware of these problems and is going to great lengths to preserve our beautiful land. About 30,000 kilometers square, or 13% of the land area of this hotspot, is officially protected, but many of these protected areas are far from pristine. Just over half of the protected land area, totaling a little over 16,000 kilometers squared, is in IUCN categories, which afford greater protection. In general, there is a great need for much better management, monitoring, and enforcement of protected areas throughout the Caribbean. Cuba has about 15% of its land area in conservation units. Dominicana has a little over 20% of its territory designated for protection, while the Dominican Republic reports about 15%. However, many of these reserves lack formal management plans and are too small to effectively conserve biodiversity. So how do you propose the hotspot could be preserved? The public seems to think the government should create rules that the population has to follow, as well as administering safer, more preserving ways of living. They also think the government should be in charge, but with input from the population, by perhaps making a website where people can add ideas for preservation. Well, that is all the time we have for today on Caribbean Island News. Thank you for tuning in, and if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, please email us at caribbeanisland@news.com. Thanks for watching.